Hello, story lovers, and welcome to Tales with Tasha and our weekly roundup. This video has all the exciting stories from this week in one place, as well as a brand new longer story at the end. If you would like to skip straight to that, head to the timestamp shown on screen now. Thank you for dropping by, and let's jump right on in.
This is going to sound silly, but is my room haunted? Yes, Jill admitted, totally failing to lie to the woman from number 3. Knew it, was the surprisingly bright response. Thank God for the cat. He's so sweet. You met Ollie? Jill asked, unable to keep the surprise out of her voice. Yes, purred away next to me until I fell asleep. He was just what I needed not to worry. He is lovely, Jill agreed. Not going to tell her then? Kevin whispered as the woman smiled and walked towards the breakfast room. Nope. You do know Ollie will do his walk through walls trick before she leaves, right? Kevin commented. Jill decided that was a problem for another day. That is not a normal cat, Luke winced at quite how high Stephanie's voice climbed. Of course not, he replied. That's Maximilian. Max washed one paw delicately while letting his eyes glow a gentle red. Luke gave him a look he hoped said, "Do you have to?" But Max did not bat a whisker. That's a demon, Stephanie screeched. No, well, maybe, we're not sure, Luke responded and realised he wasn't helping. He's harmless. Max stopped washing and looked at him. As long as you don't piss him off, Luke qualified. If Stephanie reacted this way to Max, maybe it would be best not to introduce her to his deceased relatives. Kiara stared at the blood on her hands and wanted to scream, but she dared barely breathe. Jace had yelled and screamed. He was dead now, like all the others. One by one it had picked them off. It was huge. It looked like a cat, a panther, but it wasn't. The slightest whimper and claws sounded on tiles. It rounded the corner, tail swishing behind its sleek midnight body. Please no, she begged. Oh, I have plans for you. The voice was twisted, but she recognized it even as it turned her insides to ice. Paul? The creature laughed. Come to me and live, pretty Chiara, her ex said. Run and die. She had no idea which fate was worse. Thud. You look round to see the decorative paperweight your sister brought you back from Ibiza rolling across the carpet. Do you have to? You ask the empty room. A biro skids off the edge of the desk as well. I'm busy. Your phone wobbles dangerously on its charging stand. Okay, you say, standing up. You walk to the back door and open it, counting to 10 in your head. You don't have a body anymore, you say to thin air. You could just go through the door. You thought a live cat was pushy enough. Then Spot died, and you found out how much pushier she could be. I hate cats. Noisy, pushy, traitorous creatures that shed all over my Louis Vuitton. I saw the hideous creature the moment I walked into Sonia's apartment. Luckily, it's left us alone most of the evening, but now, there it is in the middle of the bed. I take off one of my heels and throw it at it. I miss. It hisses at me and does not move. Brandishing the other shoe, I head towards it. I expected it to run, not attack, as its claws slice across the back of my hand. It's like electricity up my arm. I freeze in place, falling to the bed, totally unable to move. Well done, Bathsheba, I hear Sonia say. She will make the perfect sacrifice. Jo was amazed. Her cat Tigger had been on his last legs. She'd been ready to have him put to sleep, but the experimental treatment from Mr. Reeves, the vet, had made him a whole new cat. He was standing up and walking around and eating his tea with gusto. It was utterly amazing. The next day he made the leap from the floor to her lap and made it look like he was 5, not 14. Jo could not have been happier. She had to take him back for another checkup at the end of the week, but she was sure it would be routine. Tigger looked like his old self. It was brilliant. Of course, she didn't let him out, and he made a great deal of fuss about using the litter box. But it was worth it. It wasn't until tea time that she realised she couldn't find him. When Jo called him and tapped on a can of tuna, the most surefire way to create a cat missile, Tigger did not come. Worried, she began to look for him. Eventually, she found him behind the sofa, one of his favourite places to sleep. He was curled up, and his little body was already cold. "Oh, Tigger," she said, and picked him up. The treatments must have been too much for his heart. Knowing that part of the agreement for the trial was that the vets be allowed to examine the body, she finally placed him in his cat box, with the door open, which was stupid, but it felt like the right thing to do, and then went off to have a good cry. She would take him to Mr. Reeves in the morning. Something landing on her bed woke her in the middle of the night. "Who's there?" she demanded of the darkness, and then realised how stupid that was. It must have been a dream. Still, her mouth felt like it was full of cotton wool, so she decided to get up and find a drink before going back to sleep. It was as she sat up, something stood on her lower leg. Jo had never moved so fast in her life as she leant over and turned on the light. There, towards the end of the bed, was her cat. "Tigger!" she cried and immediately reached for him. He was still cold, but he was moving. She couldn't believe it. "Oh, my baby," she said, cuddling him. "Are you okay? You poor thing, I'm so sorry. Come on, little one, you must be hungry." She was not expecting the claws that dug into her shoulder as she climbed out of bed. "Ow," she said, but not with a huge amount of conviction. She was far too happy. "Don't claw Mummy." She had to extract his claws from her when she put him down, but he just sat down and began to wash his paws, so she looked around to decide what to feed him. The tuna from earlier had clearly been scorned. Jo loved her cat, but she didn't usually spoil him completely rotten. However, she did remember she had some beef in the fridge that was about to go out of date. Tigger deserved a treat. Rising from the dead had to be a trick not many cats had managed. The moment she placed the chopping board, knife, and beef on the table, Tigger leapt up and fixed his gaze on the meat. "Oh, so there is something you will deign to eat then," Jo said, and tickled him behind the ear. He just looked at her and then at the meat. She flicked him a bit and he gobbled it down happily. He ate the whole packet of stewing steak and then insisted on licking out the plastic package. "No more," Jo said when he looked up at her and silently meowed. He did not look impressed, jumping off the table and heading for the back door. Jo had taped the cat flap closed when Tigger had become too ill to use it safely. But clearly Tigger was back to full strength because he barged straight through it, the tape splitting like so much tissue paper. "Well, that told me," she said to the empty kitchen before setting about clearing up. The first thing Jo noticed when she stepped outside her back door the next morning was the carnage. There were feathers and fur all over the grass. "Tigger," she complained, even though her cat had yet to show his face. Clearly, Tigger had decided to reinstate himself as top of the food chain. With a sigh, Jo walked to the shed, found a spade and began to tidy up. The death toll was 2 pigeons. She couldn't really mourn those. A squirrel and 3 rabbits. Tigger had eaten bits of all of them and torn most of the rest into pieces. But she did eventually come across the front half of a rabbit almost intact. It was unpleasant, to say the least. Opening her bin bag, she went to shovel the remains into it, and it twitched. As she loomed over it, the front legs began to move, and the ears twitched even though half of it was missing. She reacted out of pure instinct and hit it as hard as she could with the spade. There was a nasty crunch, but when she lifted the spade again, there was no further twitching. By the looks of it, she had crushed its skull. By the time she had it in the bag, she had herself convinced the twitching was just remaining nerve impulses, and she put the remains in the dustbin. Tigger did not show up again until lunchtime. "I hope you're pleased with yourself," she said. That was when she noticed his eyes were looking a little cloudy. "Oh, little one, are you okay?" she asked, instantly concerned. She gave him a bit of love first, noting that he seemed to be molting a lot, given the clumps of fur that came out as she did so. His eyes looked very dull and lifeless. It took her 20 minutes to get him in his box. She had a couple of large scratches to prove it, and then she was in the car to the vet's. Surprisingly, Tigger made no noise at all on the journey, just kept scratching at the carrier. Mr. Reeves agreed to see Tigger immediately, but this just resulted in inconclusive noises and a bite for the vet. Jo went back to her life. On Friday afternoon, she had a call to say Mr. Reeves wouldn't be available for the follow-up appointment on the Saturday due to illness, but as long as Tigger was okay, not to worry. The only thing that really did worry her was the fact Tigger didn't seem to like his cat food anymore. He would only eat fresh meat. He was also hunting. A lot. Her garden always had feathers in it, but nothing as bad as the rabbit. Normally, Jo liked to sleep in on Saturday mornings, just for an hour or so, but when she woke up, she was far too on edge. She really, really did not want to believe the view from the kitchen window. Rubbing her face in her hands, she grabbed her boots from beside the back door and pulled them on. She picked up her shotgun and pocketed a handful of shells before loading it, taking no chances in case there was an aggressive animal in the vicinity. She also grabbed her wax jacket and put it on over the rest of what she was wearing. Stepping outside the back door, she stared at the dead sheep in the middle of her grass. At some point in the night, something had knocked down part of the fence between her garden and the sheep field. There was blood all over the fallen wire and wood, and she could only assume there had been a battle to the death, the casualty being the sheep. It could have been a dog or foxes, but it was a full-grown sheep, not a lamb, so it was dangerous. The sheep was lying on its side, and its entrails were spread out from a large gash in its stomach. Not a pretty sight. Jo held her shotgun and looked around to see if anything was lurking. She was just glancing along the tree line when she felt pressure on her Wellington boot. Looking down, she almost screamed. The sheep was moving, and it was trying to bite her boot. Sheep had slightly mad-looking eyes at the best of times, as far as Jo was concerned, and this one looked utterly insane. There was also mist in its eyes. There was no way the sheep could still be alive, not with most of its insides on the outside. She finally had to admit what the mist was. She was looking into dead eyes. The sheep had been killed, and then it had come back. Jo lifted the shotgun, stepped back and aimed at the sheep's head. After she blew its brains out, it stopped moving. Walking like an automaton, Jo went into the house. She was about to pick up the phone when a familiar shape jumped onto the counter. Tigger was a mess. His fur was covered in blood and other gore. He smelt very peculiar. One of his ears was missing, and Jo's stomach fell into her shoes as she looked into misty, dead eyes. It had all started with Tigger. She realized that now. Something about the experimental treatment meant he had died, and he had come back. Tigger was dead, and he was decaying, only he wasn't lying in a grave. The whole thought was horrifying. Tigger meowed at her silently. The thought Mr. Reeves might be wandering around as a zombie by now almost made her laugh hysterically, but instead she carefully picked up the shotgun. "Sorry, little one," she said, and pulled the trigger. It was a gore-fest. A shotgun at that range was very powerful. However, she didn't even bother to clear up, just walked back out into her garden. She had to find every single creature Tigger had killed and make sure it was still dead. As she walked down the garden to the flat fence at the end, 3 cats jumped onto the wall at the side. She recognized the black and white and the tabby from the house at the end of the road, but she had no idea where the plain black one had come from. One was missing an eye, another had a mangled front leg, and she couldn't see any obvious damage on the other, but one thing she could make out was the mist in the 5 eyes looking at her. She lifted the gun. It was as good a place to start as any.